Lieutenant James Hawthorne knew he was having a terrible day when his routine maintenance check on the quantum relay station turned into an unwanted first contact situation. The Krylaxian ship materialized from what appeared to be solid space itself, its crystalline surface refracting starlight in impossible patterns. Engineering to command, "We have an unidentified vessel dash," was all he managed before the transport beam caught him. His tools scattered in zero gravity as his body dissolved into streams of light. The last thing he saw was Earth's orbital defense grid, useless against this unknown technology. The Krylaxians, as he would later learn they were called, didn't look like any alien species humanity had encountered in their brief venture into interstellar politics. Their bodies seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, with limbs that bent through spaces that shouldn't exist and eyes that appeared to see in every direction simultaneously. Species: human. Designation: technical expert. Classification: high-value asset. The creature examining him spoke in perfect English, though its mouth, if it had one, never moved. Hawthorne noticed how the other aliens in the room shifted away slightly, their multidimensional forms rippling with what might have been concern. "I'm flattered," Hawthorne said, testing his restraints. "But I usually prefer dinner before being abducted by interdimensional beings." The alien examining him didn't respond to his attempt at humor, instead pressing what looked like a crystal against his forehead. Information flooded his mind: language, basic cultural understanding, and most importantly, why they had taken him. The Krylaxians were collectors, gatherers of dangerous species and individuals. Their massive prison complex, known as the Void Prison, housed the most threatening beings in the galaxy. And now, for some reason, they believed humanity belonged on that list. "Your species represents an unprecedented anomaly," the examiner explained, its form shifting through colors Hawthorne's eyes couldn't properly process. "You advance too quickly. Adapt too readily. Solve problems in ways that defy prediction matrices. We call that innovation," Hawthorne replied, wincing as another crystal pressed against his temple. "It's kind of our thing." "It is a threat," the examiner corrected. "Your contained presence will be studied. Your methods analyzed. Your potential, limited." The journey to the Void Prison took what felt like both seconds and eternities. Hawthorne watched through quantum glass windows as they traveled through spaces between spaces, the laws of physics more like polite suggestions than rules. The prison itself emerged from the void like a nightmare made real, a massive structure that seemed to eat light itself, with geometry that hurt to look at directly. "Welcome to your new home, Lieutenant Hawthorne," the guard escort announced as they led him through processing. "You have been assigned to Containment Zone Omega. Do try to survive longer than the last occupant." The mention of a previous occupant caught Hawthorne's attention. What happened to them? The guard's multidimensional form rippled in what might have been amusement. "The dragons found them, unsuitable for cohabitation." Dragons. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Before Hawthorne could ask for clarification, the massive doors to Containment Zone Omega opened, revealing a chamber large enough to house a small city. The space was dark, save for strange bioluminescent patterns that pulsed along the walls like heartbeats. "One more thing," the guard added as they prepared to seal him in. "The dragons in this containment zone are considered Class Omega threats. They've destroyed entire civilizations. Collapsed solar systems. Rewritten the laws of reality itself. We put you with them because our predictive matrices suggest you'll either die immediately, or prove why humans are exactly as dangerous as we believe." The doors sealed with a sound like the end of the world, leaving Hawthorne alone in the massive chamber. Or at least, apparently alone. The darkness around him seemed to move with purpose, and he could have sworn he saw stars twinkling in the shadows where no stars should exist. Well, a voice like cosmic radiation given form emerged from the darkness. "What do we have here? A human, in our humble abode?" The speaker remained hidden, but Hawthorne could feel the weight of ancient eyes upon him. Technical Lieutenant James Hawthorne, he introduced himself, keeping his voice steady. Recently abducted, slightly annoyed about it, and apparently your new roommate. He paused, then added, I don't suppose any of you know how to make a decent cup of coffee? The service here seems somewhat lacking. A sound like crystal wind chimes filled the chamber, laughter, Hawthorne realized. 3 forms emerged from the darkness, each one more impossible than the last. The first was a dragon that seemed to be made of pure energy, its form barely contained in this reality. The second appeared to be woven from the fabric of time itself, its scales showing past and future in equal measure. The third was the largest, its body constantly shifting between solid matter and pure possibility. I am the Rix, the energy dragon announced. With me are Visira of the temporal weave and Karnox the matter shifter. And you, James Hawthorne, have been thrown into our cage because the Krylaxians fear what they cannot control. They believe humans to be unpredictable, Visira added, her voice echoing from multiple timelines at once. Dangerous in ways their mathematics cannot quantify. And are they right? Karnox rumbled, matter shifting and reforming with each word. Hawthorne looked up at the 3 cosmic beings, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, he said, I suppose that depends on whether you're interested in proving them right. Because I have some ideas about this prison that our hosts might find mathematically improbable. The dragons exchanged looks that seemed to bend reality itself, and Hawthorne knew he had their attention. The Krylaxians had made a crucial mistake. They had taken a human engineer and placed him exactly where he needed to be to cause maximum chaos. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning their captors' worst fears into self-fulfilling prophecies. Hawthorne spent his first few hours in Containment Zone Omega learning about his new cellmates. Each dragon, he discovered, represented a fundamental force of the universe, and each had a very good reason for being locked away. The Krylaxians fear what they cannot predict, the Rix explained, his energy form pulsing with each word. I once powered an entire civilization with my essence. But when that civilization began to evolve beyond the Krylaxians' mathematical models, they intervened, Hawthorne finished, understanding dawning. They're not collectors. They're controllers. Visira's temporal scales rippled, showing fragments of past and future. Precisely. They build their empire on the belief that everything must be quantifiable, predictable. Species that defy their models are deemed threats. Which explains why they're suddenly interested in humans, Hawthorne mused, pacing the massive chamber. We're probably wreaking havoc on their probability matrices just by existing. Karnox, who had been quietly observing, shifted his massive form. Humans adapt too quickly, solve problems in ways their equations cannot predict. But there is more to your imprisonment than mere containment, little engineer. Hawthorne stopped pacing. What do you mean? The matter-shifting dragon's form condensed, becoming more focused. Why place you here, with us? The Krylaxians never mix prisoners without purpose. They believe chaos breeds opportunity. Or, Hawthorne said slowly, his engineer's mind racing, they're running an experiment. Seeing what happens when you combine unpredictable elements. Visira's eyes swirled with timeline possibilities. Yes. I see it now. Fragments of potential futures. They believe either you will die, proving humans are merely lucky rather than truly adaptable. Or we'll work together, the Rix concluded, proving their fears about uncontrolled variables correct. Hawthorne grinned. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling rather uncontrolled at the moment. Tell me about your previous escape attempts. The dragons shared what Hawthorne recognized as a weary look. We have tried, Karnox rumbled. Individually and together. The prison adapts, learns. It is built from mathematically perfect materials, designed to counter our specific abilities. Perfect, Hawthorne said, his grin widening. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The dragons exchanged confused glances. You find our failure encouraging? The Rix asked. I find their overconfidence encouraging, Hawthorne corrected. See, that's the problem with building a mathematically perfect prison. The moment you introduce an element that doesn't follow your mathematical rules, the entire system becomes vulnerable. Visira finished, her temporal scales showing glimpses of possibilities. Hawthorne nodded. And humans? We're really good at breaking mathematical certainties. Now, tell me about the prison's security systems. Everything you've learned, everything you've tried. Let's see how their perfect equations handle a healthy dose of human chaos theory. Over the next several hours, the dragons shared their knowledge. The prison was built in layers, each one mathematically designed to counter specific threats. Energy dampeners for the Rix, temporal stabilizers for Visira, matter phase locks for Karnox. All perfect, all precise, all following the Krylaxians' beloved equations. The guards follow precise patterns, the Rix explained, projecting a light show of previous observations. Every movement calculated to maintain optimal security coverage. Even their random checks aren't random, Visira added. They follow complex but predictable probability curves. Hawthorne absorbed every detail, his mind already breaking the problem down the way only a human engineer could. Tell me, he said finally, what happens when their sensors detect a threat? They adapt, Karnox answered. Redistribute power, reinforce affected areas, adjust their patterns to counter whatever they detect. Perfect, Hawthorne said again. Absolutely perfect. You know what we humans learned a long time ago? The best way to break a perfect system is to make it protect itself to death. He began to outline his plan, using scrap material to sketch diagrams on the floor. The dragons listened, their ancient minds grasping the beautiful insanity of human thinking. The plan was elegant in its chaos, brilliant in its deliberate imperfection. It's impossible, the Rix said finally. It violates at least 7 fundamental laws of physics. Only 7? Hawthorne asked innocently. I must be losing my touch. But here's the thing about human engineers, we see laws of physics more as polite suggestions. Besides, with your powers combined with human ingenuity, we could make impossible things happen, Visira whispered, her temporal scales showing glimpses of potential success. More than that, Karnox rumbled, matter shifting excitedly. We could make their own perfect system work against them. Hawthorne stood back, admiring his rough plans. The Krylaxians wanted to see what would happen when they mixed unpredictable elements. Let's give them exactly what they asked for. But first, he turned to his new allies with a spark in his eyes that would have made the Krylaxians' probability matrices short-circuit. First, we need to run some experiments of our own. Because if there's one thing humans excel at besides breaking perfect systems. His grin turned predatory. It's weaponizing the results. The dragons felt something they hadn't experienced in eons, hope, mixed with a healthy dose of anticipation. The Krylaxians had made a fatal error in their calculations. They had assumed that putting their most dangerous prisoners together would either result in chaos or submission. They hadn't considered the third option, that their perfect mathematical prison was about to get a crash course in human engineering principles. And the first rule of human engineering? Anything can be broken. You just have to find the right way to apply pressure. The first test of Hawthorne's plan came 3 days into his imprisonment. The Krylaxian guards had maintained their perfectly calculated routines, their multidimensional forms rippling through their patrol patterns with mathematical precision. Ready? Hawthorne asked the Rix, who hovered near the chamber's energy grid. The dragon's form pulsed with barely contained power. This plan of yours violates everything we know about energy manipulation, the Rix replied. The calculations alone should make it impossible. That's why it'll work, Hawthorne said confidently. They're expecting you to follow the rules of energy conservation. They're not expecting you to. He gestured vaguely. Wing it. Wing it, the Rix repeated the human phrase with a mixture of confusion and amusement. You want me to approach cosmic energy manipulation with the same precision one might use to toss a stone into a pond. Exactly. Keep their sensors busy trying to calculate something that defies calculation. Meanwhile, Vizira had positioned herself near the temporal barrier grid. Her scales shifted through past and future moments, creating a dizzying display of probability. The temporal stabilizers are at maximum efficiency, she reported. They're ready for any traditional attempt at time manipulation. Perfect, Hawthorne grinned. Then they won't be looking for an imperfect manipulation. Remember, we're not trying to break time, we just want to give it a slight case of hiccups. Carnox, the largest of the dragons, had compressed his massive form into a more concentrated mass. The matter phase locks are active. They will prevent any attempt to shift between states of matter. Good thing we're not trying to shift matter, Hawthorne said, checking his makeshift chronometer. We're just going to make them think we are. Everyone ready? 3, 2, 1. The plan unfolded like a symphony of chaos. The Rix released bursts of energy, not in the controlled, calculable ways the prison expected, but in random, sputtering pulses, like a cosmic engine backfiring. The prison systems immediately began redirecting power to contain what they perceived as an energy manipulation attempt. Simultaneously, Vizira began creating microtemporal distortions. Not enough to actually bend time, but enough to make the temporal stabilizers detect potential anomalies. Like temporal static, the effects were small enough to be almost dismissible, but numerous enough to demand system resources. Carnox's role was perhaps the subtlest. He didn't attempt to shift matter, instead, he created thousands of microscopic vibrations in his own form, each one just significant enough to trigger the matter phase detection systems. The prison's perfect mathematical systems did exactly what they were designed to do, they responded to each perceived threat with precisely calculated countermeasures. Power was diverted, barriers were strengthened, and security protocols were enhanced. And that's when Hawthorne's true plan revealed itself. Look at their power distribution, he whispered excitedly. See how they're reinforcing each system independently. They're so focused on maintaining perfect containment that they're not seeing the pattern. The dragons observed as the prison systems continued to respond to their minor provocations. Each response was perfect, precise, and completely predictable. The beauty of perfect mathematics, Hawthorne explained, is that it can't handle imperfect variables. They're so busy trying to solve for X that they're not noticing Y and Z doing a little dance in the corner. As if to prove his point, the first warning alarms began to sound. The prison systems had detected multiple potential breaches, each requiring precise responses. But the random, unpredictable nature of the threats meant the responses were becoming increasingly complex. Their computational systems are approaching maximum capacity, Vizira observed, her temporal sight revealing the strain on the prison's infrastructure. They're trying to calculate perfect responses to imperfect situations. And now for the real fun, Hawthorne said. The Rix, ready for Phase 2? The energy dragon's form brightened. I still don't understand how this will work. That's exactly why it will. You're going to release energy in a way that doesn't make sense, not in controlled bursts, but in a pattern based on the Fibonacci sequence, only wrong. Wrong? The Rix seemed both confused and intrigued. Human wrong, Hawthorne clarified. Like humming a song but deliberately hitting every third note off-key. Their systems will try to find the pattern, trying to predict where the next burst will come from. As the Rix began his discordant energy symphony, Hawthorne turned to Vizira. Ready to make time hiccup? The temporal dragon's scales rippled with anticipation. I still believe this is madness. The best plans usually are. Remember, we're not trying to change time, we're just trying to make their sensors think we are. Like temporal sleight of hand. The effects were immediate and spectacular. The prison systems, already strained from the first phase, began generating cascading alerts. Each perfect response triggered new anomalies, which required new responses, creating a feedback loop of mathematical chaos. "Look at that," Hawthorne said proudly. "Their perfect system is starting to show cracks. Not physical ones, mathematical ones. They're so busy trying to maintain perfect containment that they're not seeing the bigger picture." Carnox, who had been quietly observing, rumbled with newfound respect. "You're not trying to break out of the prison," he realized. "You're trying to break their understanding of how containment works." "Exactly. Because once they start doubting their own equations." Hawthorne's grin turned predatory. "That's when we show them what really happens and you put a human engineer in a dragon's cage." The alarms continued to blare, and in the distance, they could hear the sound of confused guards trying to make sense of their readings. The perfect mathematical prison was getting its first lesson in human chaos theory. And this was just the beginning. The Krylaxian prison's alarms had been sounding for 3 consecutive cycles. Guards rushed through quantum-folded corridors, their multidimensional forms rippling with increasing distress as system after system reported anomalies that shouldn't exist. "Fascinating," Hawthorne muttered, watching through the containment field as another squad of guards hurried past. "They're still trying to find a mathematical solution to an inherently chaotic problem." Vizira's temporal scales flickered with amusement. "The future possibilities are entertaining. Their probability matrices are approaching complete collapse." The prison's response to their carefully orchestrated chaos had been exactly what Hawthorne predicted. Instead of recognizing the fundamental flaw in their approach, the Krylaxians had doubled down on their mathematical models, adding layer upon layer of increasingly complex calculations to try and contain the unexplainable. "Their arrogance will be their undoing," the Rix observed, his energy form pulsing with anticipation. "They believe everything must follow their mathematical laws. And that's why they'll never understand humans," Hawthorne said, making final adjustments to his makeshift control system, a bizarre combination of dragon-enhanced materials that by all rights shouldn't work. "We look at mathematical impossibilities and think, challenge accepted." Carnox, who had been monitoring the prison's matter phase locks, suddenly shifted his massive form. "They're coming." The prison director itself. Right on cue, a being that seemed to exist in at least 7 dimensions at once materialized outside their containment zone. Unlike the guards, whose forms merely suggested multiple dimensions, the director's existence seemed to actively deny the basic laws of reality. "Fascinating," the director's voice resonated through their minds. "Your combined actions have generated mathematical impossibilities that should not exist. Explain." Hawthorne stepped forward, unable to hide his grin. "Well, you see, there's this old human saying about mixing unexpected ingredients." "Your species continues to defy our models," the director interrupted. "We placed you here to prove a theory, that humanity's apparent ability to generate impossible outcomes was merely statistical anomaly. Instead, you have." The being's form flickered with what might have been frustration. "You have weaponized chaos itself." "Oh, that's not chaos," Hawthorne corrected cheerfully. "That's just human engineering combined with dragon power. Want to see real chaos?" Before the director could respond, Hawthorne gave a signal. The dragons moved in perfect synchronization, or rather, imperfect synchronization, which was exactly what they needed. The Rix released a burst of energy that followed no known patterns, creating interference that the prison systems couldn't possibly predict. Simultaneously, Vizira generated temporal distortions that made local time flow like water around rocks, not breaking any laws of physics but certainly making them question their life choices. Carnox, for his part, began shifting his matter state in ways that shouldn't have been possible, not enough to trigger the matter phase locks, but enough to make them strain their computational capacity trying to analyze it. The director's form actually stuttered, its multidimensional existence struggling to process what it was seeing. This cannot be." Our equations are perfect. Our models account for every possibility. That's your problem right there, Hawthorne said, watching as warning lights began flashing throughout the prison complex. You tried to use perfect math to contain imperfect beings. Let me show you what happens when you do that. He activated his makeshift control system, a device that shouldn't have worked, built from materials that shouldn't have been compatible, operating on principles that laughed in the face of conventional physics. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Every system in the prison began reporting contradictory information. Security fields flickered as their control systems tried to compensate for impossibilities. Quantum-locked doors started receiving signals that they were simultaneously open and closed. "What have you done?" the director demanded, its form becoming increasingly unstable as it tried to process the cascade of impossibilities. "I introduced a little human creativity to your perfect system," Hawthorne explained. "See, while you were busy trying to calculate every possible outcome, you forgot one crucial variable: imagination." The dragons watched in amazement as the prison's perfect mathematical framework began to crumble under the weight of its own certainty. But their victory celebration was cut short by a sudden, ominous tremor that shook the entire complex. "Warning," the prison's automated systems announced. "Critical instability detected in primary containment grid. Probability matrix collapse imminent. Emergency protocols engaged." The director's form stabilized, and something like triumph radiated from its multidimensional existence. "You have done exactly as we predicted. Emergency Protocol Omega is now active." Hawthorne's grin faltered for the first time. "What do you mean, exactly as predicted?" "Your escape attempt was anticipated. Improbable, but not impossible. And now." The director's form began to expand, filling the corridor with impossible geometries. "Now we will see the true purpose of your imprisonment." The dragons moved closer to Hawthorne as the prison's lighting shifted to a deep, pulsing red. Something was wrong, very wrong. "I don't suppose," Hawthorne said to his dragon allies, "that any of you know what Emergency Protocol Omega is?" Vizira's temporal scales showed fragments of possible futures, each one darker than the last. "The future, it's changing. Something is awakening." The director's voice resonated with dark satisfaction. "Welcome, Lieutenant Hawthorne, to the true purpose of the Void Prison. Your chaos was never meant to be contained. It was meant to be harvested." The Void Prison's emergency lights pulsed like dying stars as the truth of their situation became horrifyingly clear. Through the quantum glass barriers, Hawthorne watched as other containment zones activated, revealing hundreds of captured beings, each one selected for their ability to defy mathematical prediction. "You never wanted to contain us," Hawthorne said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This whole prison, it's a battery. Finally, you understand." The director's form expanded further, its multidimensional existence now filling the entire corridor. "For millennia, the Krylaxians have sought to perfect the universe. To eliminate chaos, to enforce mathematical purity. But there was always one flaw in our calculations. You can't eliminate chaos without understanding it first," Hawthorne finished. "So you built this prison to harvest it." Therix's energy form flared with rage. "All those civilizations you destroyed, all those beings you imprisoned, we were never meant to be studied. You were meant to be fuel," Vizira whispered, her temporal scales showing the horrific truth across multiple timelines. The prison systems continued their calculated collapse, but now Hawthorne saw it for what it really was, not a failure, but a transformation. Each mathematical impossibility they had generated was being channeled, stored, weaponized. "Your species proved to be the final catalyst," the director explained, something like satisfaction rippling through its impossible form. "Humans, so uniquely gifted at generating chaos within order. Combined with beings of pure cosmic power." It gestured at the dragons. "The perfect formula for harvesting pure entropy." Karnax's matter shifted aggressively. You believe you can contain and control such power? Even your perfect mathematics must show the impossibility. Control? The director's laugh resonated through multiple dimensions. We do not seek to control chaos. We seek to unleash it. A universe-wide reset, burning away all imperfection in an instant of pure, calculated entropy. Hawthorne looked at his dragon allies, then back at the director. You know what your biggest mistake was? Besides the whole, trying to end the universe thing? Enlighten us, human. You assumed that chaos can't be directed. That it's just random destruction. Hawthorne's grin returned, but there was something dangerous in it now. Let me show you what happens when chaos has purpose. He turned to the dragons. Remember how I said my device shouldn't work? That it violated the laws of physics? The dragons nodded. I lied. It works perfectly, just not for what they think it does. The Ricks, remember how we discussed energy conversion that breaks the rules? Now would be a good time. The energy dragon's form brightened with understanding. You wanted them to harvest our chaos. Because now it's part of their system, Hawthorne confirmed. Vizira, those temporal hiccups we created? They're not random. The time dragon's scales rippled. They follow a pattern, a human pattern. Exactly. And Karnak's? All those matter phase violations we've been generating. The massive dragon's form condensed with anticipation. They've been absorbed into their containment grid. Which means, Hawthorne's grin turned predatory, we're not trapped in here with them. They're trapped in here with us. With perfect synchronization, true perfect synchronization, not the mathematical approximation the Krylaxians understood, they acted. The Ricks released his energy not in chaos, but in precisely calculated bursts that matched the prison's own resonance. Vizira's temporal manipulations aligned with the facility's quantum clock, creating a cascade of cause and effect that propagated through every system. Karnax's matter manipulation found every flaw their earlier chaos had created and expanded them exponentially. The director's form wavered as it realized the truth. Impossible, your actions, they follow patterns we cannot. Can't predict? Hawthorne suggested. That's because you forgot the most important thing about chaos, it's not the opposite of order. It's just a different kind of order. One that can't be controlled or contained. One that fights back. Throughout the prison, containment fields began to fall. Not in random failure, but in a deliberate wave of calculated release. Every being the Krylaxians had imprisoned for their unpredictability was suddenly, intentionally free. You wanted to harvest chaos? Hawthorne asked as alarms blared and the prison's perfect mathematical structure began to tear itself apart. Congratulations. You just got more than you bargained for. The director's form began to fragment across dimensions. What have you done? Isn't it obvious? Hawthorne watched as his dragon allies began to glow with power no longer contained by mathematical certainty. I took your perfect system and showed it something it had never seen before, purposeful imperfection. Calculated chaos. Human engineering. The prison's quantum core went critical, but not in the way the Krylaxians had planned. Instead of harvesting chaos to remake the universe, it was channeling that power back into every being they had tried to contain. The director could only watch as its perfect mathematical prison transformed into something else entirely, a beacon of liberation. Remember this, Hawthorne said as the facility's remaining systems collapsed around them, the next time you think about trying to contain what you don't understand. Some things aren't meant to be calculated. Some things are meant to be free. The void prison's final collapse was visible across 12 dimensions and 3 temporal planes. But it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Throughout the galaxy, the Krylaxians' perfect mathematical empire began to crumble as beings they had dismissed as chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous proved to be something else entirely. Perfectly, beautifully impossible. And at the heart of it all, a human engineer and 3 cosmic dragons stood in the ruins of impossibility itself, proving that sometimes the most perfect equation is the one that breaks all the rules. After all, that's what humans do best.